This BizNews Briefing is brought to you by Investec Business Banking. Make the move from business as usual to Investec Business Banking. Hello, good day, and it is Tuesday, the 8th of April, 2025. This news flow recently has been distressing, and that's putting it mildly. Yesterday, as we reported on the BizNews Briefing, Cyril Ramaphosa attacked the business community, saying that he will not be dictated to by business leaders who had just returned from Washington, where they'd met with various insiders, both in the Trump administration and on think tanks, and came back to say, please, Mr. Ramaphosa, and please, John Steenhuisen, stay together in the government of national unity. Overcome your issues. Well, all is not as it seems. It never is. And I spoke this morning to political analyst Moeletsi Mbeki, who provides some context on the latest furore.
Well, my own view when I listened to President Ramaphosa responding to the business letter, I think he totally overreacted. There was no suggestion of dictation in the letter. In fact, the letter uses the word that it pleads with the leaders of the ANC and the President of South Africa not to break up the government of national unity. So Ramaphosa, I think he was playing to some gallery of sorts when he then stood up in front of the cameras and saying he will not accept dictation from business. There was no dictation from business. It was actually a plea with him for him and John Steenhuisen not to break up the government of national unity. So I think there's a lot of posturing in what we are seeing, especially from the ANC leaders about the government of national unity. They are trying to tell the voters, who are incidentally are rejecting them, they are trying to tell the voters that they are tough guys and the voters should continue voting for them. I don't think it washes. That's why the ANC is at 40%, and the latest opinion survey shows it as being down to 32% if there were an election held today. So it's fooling no one playing to this gallery of being tough guys and accusing business of dictating when it very clearly was pleading with them.
It's an interesting point that he makes there, and that full interview, by the way, with Moeletsi Mbeki is on the BizNews TV channel on YouTube. The Edelman's Trust report, which comes out every year, I've been to a few of the releases in Davos. They usually release it on a Tuesday morning in Davos. So big deal to the world and to business leaders. It tells us that of the 33,000 people who are surveyed around the world, about 1,500 here in South Africa, they provide trust levels on many of the countries. I think it's about 6 countries. And those trust levels show in South Africa that the grouping that is most trusted is business, by far. Next come NGOs, and then right at the bottom at very low trust levels. In fact, the government in South Africa before the GNU was the lowest trust level of any government in the world. But back down at the bottom are media and government. So what Moeletsi is saying is pretty accurate and needs to be seen in that context. I spoke yesterday with the chair of the federal exec of the Democratic Alliance, Helen Zille, and posed a similar question to her. And your message to the business community, given that they really want you to stay in the GNU, butt out like Ramaphosa is saying to them?
No, I'm not saying to them that they must butt out. I'm glad they're interested. It's worse if they're not interested. I mean, I like everybody to be interested in the future of the country so that we can discuss the key messages with them. Obviously, I understand that they are interested in protecting their investments, protecting their profit margins, protecting all of the above. And that's useful because it helps South Africa to succeed if they are that invested in South Africa. That's very valuable. But what I do want to tell them is that we have to think of the medium term. The most critical crisis for South Africa would be the collapse of the DA. Then there's really no hope for this country, none at all. And we cannot be beaten into submission by an ANC that wants us to be their lackeys and just prop them up in government because they didn't get enough votes so that they can implement the dire ANC policies. We're not about to do that. And they must understand that asking that price of us is too high. We have to make sure that the DA can sustain its base and grow and become the biggest party in all the metros, because that over the medium term is the only way we can rescue South Africa's economy and their investments. So please don't demand anything that will see the demise of the Democratic Alliance, because you might get short-term gain for long-term deep, deep pain.
Helen Zille, she talks a lot of sense, and that interview with Zille covered a lot of ground, and it too is available on BizNews TV. In fact, more than 80,000 people had already watched it in less than the first 24 hours that it had been up. There was also intense focus there on the big question of the moment, the future of the government of national unity. I asked her if it seems as though the DA is intent on staying in. She said, no, not necessarily. They're still discussing it, and they haven't come to a final conclusion yet. But she also said that opinion within the ANC about whether the DA should be in there is pretty divided. Let's have a listen.
All of these things are about the divisions in the ANC. The ANC is profoundly divided. Paul Mashatile wants the DA out of the GNU because they want Cyril Ramaphosa out of the ANC. And this is all about factionalism in the ANC, which is a many-headed hydra. Some people in the ANC say, please allow the DA to stay, but make them forfeit 2 cabinet posts, which is a joke because we are already, in terms of the agreement, 3 cabinet posts short. Then there are others who say, kick them out immediately without let or hindrance. And there are others who say, let them stay because the alternative is too ghastly to contemplate. So the ANC is deeply divided, and they're deeply divided around their own internal succession dynamics. Paul Mashatile wants to succeed Cyril Ramaphosa, and they have an elective conference in 2027. Fikile Mbalula wants to succeed Cyril Ramaphosa, and he's up against Paul Mashatile. And so I can continue. The ANC only think of themselves. They have an absolute dearth of talent. They have a succession battle in the middle of a dearth of talent. And here is the DA saying, listen, forget your internal fights. We're trying to rescue South Africa. That is our mandate. And let's look at how we do that.
Well, that's a lot of the focus at the moment, but much of the emotion that we're seeing between the DA and the ANC, and indeed the whole increase of 0.5 percentage point in VAT that pushed this to the brink, has got a lot to do with what's happening in the world, and in particular with the Trump tariffs. Now, it's interesting to think that if the Trump administration had not cancelled the free aid, the gift of $450 million a year that was provided to South Africa for HIV, well, $450 million, it's pretty easy to multiply that. It's nearly 9 billion rand. Without that, you wouldn't have needed an increase in VAT. But that pressure came to bear on the ANC, on the Treasury, on the department, and now it's getting more intense. Trump tariffs come in tomorrow, and that is going to have a huge knock-on effect in certain sectors in South Africa if it's allowed to go ahead in its current form. Well, The Economist has been looking at this, and in the daily podcast on The Economist called The Intelligence, a couple of the thoughts were focused on, not least, should other countries be retaliating? And I guess this is something that South Africa too should be considering. We'll be talking a lot about Trump tariffs and South Africa in the rest of this program, but let's get some background here from The Economist.
The difficulty with retaliating, Rosie, is that you're going to hurt your own economy if you do that. As we've discussed before, Trump's tariffs are going to hurt the American economy. So other countries, when thinking about retaliation, will weigh the consequences of the retaliation for their own producers, their own consumers. So I think part of the calculation here is it worth retaliating? Is it worth the economic pain of retaliating? That's one thing. It's possible also that some of these countries, the UK, for example, are thinking that retaliation will only spur even greater tariffs and result in a spiral, and perhaps they have a better chance of negotiating with Donald Trump if they don't react right now.
So that's what countries are doing, Rachna, but how have businesses reacted?
Some businesses are going to be hit hard. Apple, for example, the world's most valuable listed company, is in a bit of a pickle here. Most of the production of its gadgets still happens in China. In response to tariffs that came in Donald Trump's first term, the company started moving some of the production of its iPhones and other gadgets out of China and to Vietnam and India. And now Donald Trump has decided to hit these countries with tariffs as well. What are we seeing in terms of businesses' response? I would say we haven't seen much yet. Possibly few bosses want to stick their head above the parapet and criticize the president. He may not take criticism well. It's possible also that they're waiting to see what happens. So these reciprocal tariffs are due to come in on April the 9th. As we just discussed, there may be some negotiations, there may be some changes to the final rates. So I think businesses are waiting and watching. And the other thing to say is, a chief executive doesn't decide to build a new factory at the drop of a hat. These things cost a lot of money, they take a lot of time. So they'll want to get a sense of whether the tariffs are here to stay and really try and get as much certainty as they can before they start changing their plans.
In the world of business banking, the bottom line can often triumph over relationships. At Investec, we value both. Make the move from business as usual to Investec Business Banking, out of the ordinary.
At Sun Exchange, we make going solar simple, profitable, and completely risk-free. Join over 100 satisfied South African customers already enjoying the benefits of risk-free solar. Start saving today. Visit sunexchange.com and join the solar revolution.
So what is South Africa to do? Moeletsi Mbeki again, from our conversation this morning, said it's not rocket science. Just apply some rational perspective, a dollop of humility, and things can be turned around.
The experts on American politics tell us that Donald Trump is a transactional person. He wants he wants something for what he's giving. So the Americans have been giving us AGOA, and that's one-way traffic. It's them giving us. And as I pointed out, in the 1980s and early 90s, they gave us scholarships for our students, and they gave us sanctions against the apartheid regime. So the Americans have been giving and giving and giving to South Africa. Well, now that we are a normal democratic country, we have to have reciprocal relationships where we also give. The question is that what is it that we have that Donald Trump and the administration value about South Africa? And that's what we should be discussing with them. Yeah.
So it's really that simple, that one has a look at what can we give them so that they will be able to give us back, get rid of these awful tariffs. I had a mail this morning from the Citrus Growers Association of South Africa, and they are really worried because the citrus is on its way to the United States and it will be priced out of the market if tomorrow those tariffs are implemented, and then all the citrus would come back, and that's going to have a big impact on 20,000 jobs. And the town of Citrusdal, which has focused its attention on the United States, who knows what's going to happen there. So there are some immediate practical implications. And I guess we haven't been too good at urgently addressing things. Would that be part of the recommendation as well, that the government, and if it's a government of national unity, gets together quickly, boxes clever, as Helen Zille told us yesterday, and actually gets something on the table quickly before the country starts losing jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. The two main parties at the end of the day, I mean, they are the people that matter in the government of national unity. They have to sit down and look at what is it that the Americans are interested in about South Africa, which they would like to get from South Africa. And then to sound out, through the various channels, whether they are in the right directions. The good thing about the United States is that it has think tanks like the Center for International and Strategic Studies, which have a lot of access to government, to the government of the United States. They should go and see these think tanks and say to them, look, what is it that this guy wants? What can we give him that he would consider to be valuable? So as I say, there are these think tanks. There are the Council on Foreign Relations, the Hudson Institute. These are all the think tanks in the United States that our diplomats should be going to and discussing with them, and delegates and people from the government of national unity, 2 or 3 people, should be talking to these people. What is it that the Americans would want in exchange for continuing the duty-free entrance of South African products? And on top of that, we have over 600 American companies in South Africa. They should go and see these companies and say, look, guys, what does this man want? What can we offer this guy? But as you know, our government is very inept, I'm afraid.
Ineptitude. Come on, Pretoria, prove Moeletsi wrong. I think the points that he makes there, though, are very well worth just repeating very briefly. PEPFAR was $450 million a year that America just sent us. They basically sent us a check. The AGOA agreement means that South African exports get entrance into the United States for free, no duties whatsoever. And that was part of the African Growth and Opportunities Act, on which South Africa is part of it. 600 American companies in South Africa. And yet, when you look at the other end of the scale, South Africa has been levying duties. Think of how much extra you had to pay for your cell phone or for your laptop. It's also had a rhetoric from the ANC, which, well, it's like an abused friend. And it eventually, at some point in time, that friend, which really was a huge friend, go and listen to that interview with Moeletsi Mbeki, right from the beginning of the attack on the apartheid regime, came from JFK, John F. Kennedy, back in the 60s. And that was the beginning of the end, if you have a look back in hindsight, for the regime that was impregnable, it appeared, in South Africa. It was the Americans what done it, if you like. Anyway, all of those things, one-way traffic is now no longer one-way traffic. And Moeletsi is saying, just see the world as it is, not as you want it to be. Let's reconsider, reassess, find out how these guys work, find out how their new leader in America operates, and let's give them what they want so that we can get what we want. It's all about enlightened self-interest. Trouble is, there are 70 other countries now who are trying to do exactly the same thing. Hopefully the South African opportunity has not closed. But here's a report from our partners at Bloomberg, which is pretty sobering.
Well, I actually had the chance to catch up with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent a short time ago, and I asked him if we could expect any tariff deals ahead of April 9th, and he told me, quote, likely not. I then asked him if countries could expect to see tariff barriers by the U.S. dropped below the 10% floor that's currently in place. And he said everything's on the table as they begin at these negotiations. Now, importantly, President Trump in the Oval Office earlier today saying he has no plans to pause the tariffs, and that it's going to take more from countries than just lowering their tariff barriers to strike a deal with this White House.
We have many countries that are coming to negotiate deals with us, and they're going to be fair deals. And in certain cases, they're going to be paying substantial tariffs. There can be permanent tariffs, and there can also be negotiations, because there are things that we need beyond tariffs.
These comments after some mixed messages from this White House as the administration pushes this is for long-term growth. In an op-ed today, the president's chief trade advisor, Peter Navarro, saying this is not a negotiation. We've heard officials in recent days double down any exemptions or carve-outs could undermine investment in reshoring manufacturing. But then those comments were followed by this post from the Treasury Secretary, who said he looks forward to, quote, upcoming productive engagement with Japan after the country's prime minister held a call with President Trump this morning. Now, Joe and Kaylee, White House officials say that as many as 70 countries have reached out to the U.S. to negotiate. When I asked the Treasury Secretary if he was optimistic about any other countries beyond Japan, he said that he was about all of them. We would be remiss if we didn't mention, though, today, Joe and Kaylee, President Trump threatening an additional 50% tariff when it comes to China if they don't back down on their retaliation plans by tomorrow.
And remember, just for a context as well, the whole idea from the Trump administration is we put on the tariff threats. The countries know they've got to reduce the tariffs they charge us, and then we have free trade around the world. That is the theory in all of this. Whether or not that's the reality will only be found out in time to come. Well, the business community, as you heard earlier from The Economist, are not raising their heads above the parapet. They're a little concerned that if they do so, like in the bad old days here, when South African businesses criticized the government, they got their heads chopped off, that a similar thing might happen with Donald Trump. But it doesn't mean that businesses around the world are sitting on their hands. Our partners at the Financial Times of London looked at this in this morning's FT News Briefing and gave some very interesting insights into what businesses are actually doing ahead of tomorrow's tariff imposition day.
For as long as trade barriers have existed, people have tried to get around them. This time is no different. Consultants are now stepping in to offer companies some pretty creative workarounds to U.S. President Donald Trump's latest round of tariffs. My colleague Stephen Foley has been looking into all this. Hey, Stephen.
Hey, good morning.
So walk me through this. What sort of maneuvers are consultants suggesting here?
They're called valuation strategies. These are the ones that the consultants I've been speaking to over the last weeks and months have been most excited about talking to their clients. Pretty simple. If you can lower the customs value, the amount that you record on a customs form that the import is worth, then the percentage tariff is going to come out to a lower number.
Do you have any examples of what this could look like?
There's a couple of different ways to do it. The rules allow a certain amount of optionality about how you pick the price at which you're describing your import. One of the strategies is to use an earlier price in the supply chain, so cutting out some of the markups that the middlemen have been adding to the cost of the import. That's one strategy that's very popular at the moment. And another is also splitting out the fees that you're paying to the supplier. So if you're a supplier of, say, a whiskey or a gin or something, you're sending that into the United States. The importer is paying a price for the drink, but the company that they're buying it from is also owns the brand and does advertising and marketing and promotions. Well, if the importer can pay a smaller price for the drink itself and then pay a separate fee for marketing and promotion, you can strip out that marketing and promotion cost. You pay a smaller duty on the imported drink.
I see. And just out of curiosity, how much could tweaking the customs value of goods in this way end up saving a company? Could it save them a considerable amount?
Oh, yeah, these are all going to add up over time. But actually, you can make some quite big savings. I've seen numbers in excess of 20 to 25% for some of these strategies.
Still, it does sound pretty complex. Could these attempts to circumvent tariffs impose costs on companies in other ways?
It's complex for sure, and that, of course, brings risk as well. There are really quite well-established rules of the road for deciding what is a market price, what is a fair price, what is an accurate price for an import. So you have to abide by those rules, and of course you can push them when there's optionality, but customs will be looking very closely to make sure that you're not pushing them too far.
I'm wondering, Stephen, what does this ultimately tell you about Trump's tariff plan? I mean, does this undercut what Trump is trying to do here with his tariffs, which is basically trying to bring American manufacturing back to American shores?
I think what it tells me is that business isn't ready to believe that these tariffs are going to stick yet. If you talk to executives, they'll tell you that re-engineering your supply chain, moving supply from one country to another, those are big and permanent moves. But of course, what we've seen from Donald Trump is that policies can be reversed or paused within days of being announced. So I think companies are loath to make big and unchangeable decisions at this point. These valuation strategies, however, that's something that you can do right now.
Stephen Foley is the FT's accounting editor based in New York. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks for having me.
Well, from the back channels to Donald Trump comes the very clear message. Take him seriously, not literally. Seriously, not literally is a good place to start for South Africa. But for businesses, well, you've got some insight there. You really need to be aware that there are ways of reducing the liability. But even if you do take it back in the supply chain, I'm not sure it's going to make those products from South Africa competitive. We'll be back again tomorrow, hopefully with better news. Cheerio. This BizNews Briefing is brought to you by Investec Business Banking. Make the move to private banking service now for your business.